At the very top of the page is the doc type. The doc type identifies what kind of document this is, and it influences how the document will be displayed in a browser. The doc type in this page indicates that it's written in XHTML 1.0 transitional. XHTML is really the same thing as HTML, it's just a little bit stricter in its rules. So for example, in XHTML, you have to use all lowercase in your tags, where old-fashioned HTML, you could mix the case and it didn't matter. Doc types have evolved over the years as HTML standards have evolved and as browser support has evolved. In the very beginning of the commercial web, in the early to mid-1990s, HTML browsers were very basic and you could only use the simplest of formatting options. Today, we have many more options for how we display pages on the web, but as HTML has evolved and as browsers have evolved, they haven't all evolved in the same way. And as we saw in the very first lesson, that can lead to real challenges when you're displaying the same pages in different browsers. One of the challenges we have now, somewhat ironically, is that most of the companies making browsers today are trying to follow standards more strictly than ever before. But because most of those browsers didn't always follow those same standards, many developers over the years came up with workarounds or hacks to try and deal with the fact that different browsers supported things differently. The result of all that is that today there are literally millions of pages on the internet that were designed for older browsers, as well as millions of pages that were designed for new browsers and follow standards. And when those new browsers hit those old pages, we run the risk that they'll be displayed even worse in the new browsers than they were in the old ones. One of the ways that we deal with that today is by having different kinds of doc types. So again, at the top of the page here is a doc type, and this doc type says this page is an XHTML 1.0 transitional. And when a browser hits that, it's going to say, oh, I should use standard rendering on this page. This page should conform to modern XHTML standards. If you're working on older web pages, pages that were created with an earlier version of Dreamweaver or with an earlier version of another HTML editor, you should know that the page may be displayed differently because of the doc type. And if a modern browser, one of the latest browsers today like IE 6 or 7 or the latest version of Firefox, arrives at a web page that doesn't have a new doc type in it, it reverts to what's called quirks mode. Quirks mode sounds really strange at first, at least it did to me. But essentially, it's an effort on the internet to manage the quirky code that evolved as web designers tried to manage the changes in HTML and the fact that not all browsers supported HTML the same way. Quirks mode enables new browsers to display old pages the way old browsers did and not break them. At least that's the hope. So here's what you should learn from all of this. If you're creating new pages in Dreamweaver, you don't have to worry much about it. You'll get the right doc type, it'll match the code that's being created in Dreamweaver, and you can forget what I just said. But if you're working on a really old site, and you're opening an existing page and making edits to it and trying to update it for the latest in CSS, if you don't change this doc type at the top of the page, browsers may try to display it in quirks mode. And then all your new beautiful standard code is going to display in a way that's even more unpredictable than the differences that still exist among modern browsers. So the thing to take away from this little lecture is that if you're working on a very old web page and you update it, you want to update the doc type here as well. And you can do that by simply typing in the new doc type or copying and pasting it in from an existing page that you've just created in Dreamweaver.